All right, biologists, this is supposed to be a short video about the cardiac cycle diagram. Let's make sense of this mass of lines and curves here. So first, we are not going to pay attention to the volume and EKG and phonocardiogram because that's not too important for us. This video is going to be shorter. We're going to look at the pressure curves. They are more important for us at this moment. So what happens is we have a heart, right? We have a heart and it kind of looks like this. You have 4 chambers, not drawn to scale. Oh my God. You have 2 atria and 2 ventricles. The atria here, you have the A pointing up like an arrow pointing up. That means they're the superior chambers. The ventricles have an arrow pointing down. It's a mnemonic. They are the lower chambers right here. You're looking at the person. So this is the right side of the person, and this is the left side of the person, right? And here in the the right side, you receive blood, poor in oxygen, low in oxygen, because it's coming from the body. And here the blood is coming fresh from the lungs, full of oxygen. Let's start here. What do we have? We have these 2 curves. They are super important for us. The dotted line is the atrial pressure, and it's increasing a little bit, right? And what does that mean? It's receiving blood. The ventricle is receiving blood, and then it starts to squeeze a little bit. The ventricle starts to squeeze. You see the pressure here inside the ventricle, the solid red line. It's increasing because the atria are squeezing and the blood is squeezing into the ventricles. Nice. What happens now? The ventricle starts to squeeze back because they're elastic, right? So they start to squeeze back. They are full of blood, and then because of their elasticity, they start to squeeze back. But the blood only flows in one direction because the action of valves. You have valves between the atria and the ventricle. They're called atrioventricular valves, or AV valves for short, right? So you have here the AV valves closing. They are closing because the pressure in the ventricle is higher than the pressure in the atria. So if the pressure here is higher, well, that's going to squeeze the blood out of here like a toothpaste tube, right? So what happens, let's erase here. So what happens is the blood wants to go back. The blood wants to go back, but the valves close. And now the blood has nowhere to go. All the valves are closed. So during this moment, the ventricle is squeezing, both ventricles, they are squeezing, but the blood has nowhere to go. That makes the pressure skyrocket. It was right here, close to 0, and now it is super high. And it gets to this moment here where the ventricular pressure, the pressure inside the ventricle, is greater than this other dotted line, the aortic pressure. So the pressure inside the aorta. Let me draw a different heart here. So what we have, we have here the aorta, which is the artery that carries blood out of the heart. And I'm gonna draw this weird heart like this. Okay, I don't care much about what's going on the other parts of the heart. I just want to see the left ventricle, right? Because here you do have a valve. We have the left atrial ventricular valve, but we saw that it's closed. And what happens here, because the pressure inside this ventricle is so high, is higher than the pressure inside the aorta, that makes the blood push out of the ventricle into the aorta. So the blood is now pushing into the aorta. That makes the volume of the aorta increase. That means you have a lot of blood here all of a sudden inside this vessel. The pressure inside the aorta also increases. So this is the moment where the aortic valve opens, and then we have the simultaneous increase of the aortic pressure and the ventricular pressure. This is the moment of ejection. The blood is being squeezed out of the ventricles. Right? The same thing happens to the pulmonary valve and the pulmonary artery, but we're not going to look at it right now because the pressures here in the left side are much greater. And then you have the pressure starts to decrease. The volume here is not that great anymore. You're squeezing the blood out, and the aortic pressure is greater than the ventricular pressure. At this moment, you have the blood wanting to go back into the ventricle, because remember, aorta is an artery. That means it has elastic fibers, it has muscle fibers. It's going to squeeze the blood too. It is very elastic, it's going to squeeze the blood. So the blood wants to go back, but we know that the blood flow is unidirectional. The blood flow is unidirectional because of the valves. So you have the aortic valve closing. Whoa, this is not what I wanted to do. You have the aortic valve closing right here. So the blood wants to go back, faces a door slamming right on his face, and it has to go back. So you see this real shy, but present increase in pressure right here. This is when the blood tries to go back, sees the door shut, and okay, so I guess my only way out is through. So this tiny bump here, this is how you know that the aortic valve closed. Okay, it closes right here, this tiny angle here, when you have right before this shy little increase in aortic pressure. Meanwhile, what's happening to the ventricle? The pressure's still going down, close to zero. It's empty now. And the pressure inside the ventricle, because it's now fully contracted, it's empty, the pressure inside the atria is greater again, greater than the ventricle, because the atria, you have the blood coming into the atria. So the blood is still coming into the atria, and you can see the atrial pressure increasing, slow and steady, right? It was empty, and now it's increasing a little bit. Now it is higher, not by much, but it's higher than the ventricular pressure. That makes the atrial ventricular valves open. Now the atrial ventricular valves will open, the blood will flow again passively, right? It's not being squeezed here. Now it's just passive movement down to the ventricle. And then you have the atrial contraction again. You see the pressure in the atria increasing. That makes the ventricles increase again. And then boom, second cardiac cycle all over again.